This is a read aloud of The Glass of Milk by Manuel Rojas. One trick that I like to do as a reader when I'm reading out of a textbook such as this that underlines the words that are probably new to me. I love that they give me definitions down here at the bottom, and you'll often find this in your English textbooks, but also in science and social studies. And one good thing that you can do for yourself as a reader is to actually look at the words before you begin the page. That way you don't have to stop and go down to the bottom and find the meaning of new words. It just helps with comprehension. So this is just one tip that I like to use. So starboard is the name of a part of the ship. So when looking forward, it's the right side of the ship. And then idling just means doing nothing. Okay, let's get started. Propped on the starboard rail, the sailor seemed to be waiting for someone. A bundle wrapped in white paper, grease-spotted, was in his left hand. His right tended his pipe. From behind some freight cars a thin youth appeared. He paused a moment, looking out to sea, and then walked on along the edge of the wharf with his hands in his pockets, idling or thinking. So the man is trying to guess, is he idling, like doing nothing, or is he thinking? When he passed in front of the ship, the sailor called out to him in English, "I say, look here!" The youth raised his head and without stopping answered in the same language, "Hello! What? Are you hungry?" There was a brief silence, during which the youth seemed to be thinking, and took one shorter step as if to stop, but then replied, smiling feebly at the sailor, it's like smiling weakly at the sailor, "No, I'm not hungry. Thanks, sailor." "All right." The sailor took his pipe from his mouth, spat, and replacing it, looked away. The youth, ashamed that he had seemed to need charity, walked a little faster, as if afraid he might change his mind. Okay, it means he's ashamed that he looked like he needed a free meal. Okay, so now we're on a new page. Let's go look at the new words for this page. Gaudy, showy in a cheap way. Port loafer is one who hangs around the docks all day with doing nothing. Timidity. Say that 5 times fast. A lack of confidence, shyness, or fearfulness. Okay. Gangways. Planks that run from a ship to the dock on which one must walk to board a vessel. Okay, let's start reading. A moment later, a gaudy tramp with a long blonde beard and blue eyes, dressed in old rags and oversized torn shoes, passed before the sailor, who without greeting called to him, "Are you hungry?" He had not yet finished the phrase when the tramp looked with shining eyes at the package the sailor held in his hands and answered hurriedly, "Yes, sir, I'm very much hungry." The sailor smiled. The package flew through the air and landed in the eager hands. The hungry fellow did not even say thanks, but sat right down on the ground, opened the still warm bundle, and happily rubbed his hands as he saw what it contained. A port loafer, remember that's someone who sits around all day and does nothing, might not speak English well, but he would never forgive himself if he didn't know enough to ask food from someone who did speak it. So this means he might not know a lot of English, but he wants to know enough English to make sure he can ask for help or ask for food. Okay. The youth, who had passed by first and had stopped nearby, had seen what happened. He was hungry too. He had not eaten for exactly 3 days, 3 long days, and more from timidity and shame than from pride. Okay. He refused to wait by the gangways, or the planks where the people board the ships, at meal times, hoping the generosity of sailors would produce some package of leftovers and bites of meat. He could not do it. He would never be able to do it. And when, as just now, someone did offer him a handout, the boy refused it heroically, though he felt his hunger increase with the refusal. Let's check out the new words. Jumped ship. Without permission, left a ship on which he was employed. Bale, a large bound package. drudgery, boring, and joyless tasks. He had been wandering for 6 days around the side streets and docks of that port. An English vessel had left him there after bringing him from Punta Arenas, where he had jumped a previous ship, or left, on which he had served as a captain's mess boy. He had spent a month there helping an Australian crabber, and then had stowed away on the first ship bound north. He was discovered the day after sailing and put to work on the boiler room. At the first large port of call he had been put off, and there had remained like a bale or a package, without a label, and without an acquaintance, without a penny, and without a trade. And this means without a trade is without a skill. He didn't know how to get a job that would pay him. As long as the ship was in port, the boy managed to eat, but after that, the great city that rose up beyond the back streets, with their taverns and cheap inns, did not attract him. They didn't interest him. It seemed a place of slavery, stale, dark, without the grand sweep of the sea. Among its high walls and narrow streets people lived and died, bewildered by agonizing drudgery. I love the beauty of the language here, but it can be hard to understand. It's basically saying he loves the freedom of the ocean and the sea, and the city itself just felt like slavery. He said he makes this comparison here, where you don't have any choices. The high walls and narrow streets. He said that people lived in drudgery. And remember, drudgery means boring and joyless. The boy was gripped by that fascination of the sea which molds the most peaceful and orderly lives as a strong arm a thin rod. Although very young, he had already made several trips along the coast of South America on various ships, doing odd jobs and tasks and odd jobs which were almost useless on land. So his skills are but on a ship. He doesn't have a lot of skills for being on land. After the ship left him, the boy walked and walked, hoping to chance upon something that would enable him to live somehow until he could get back to his home grounds, being on a boat. But he found nothing. The port was not very busy, and the few ships that had work would not take him on. Let's check out the words that are new to us. A rosary is a string of beads used generally by Roman Catholics in counting prayers. Stevedores, this is a new word for me too. Workers who load and unload ships. And lapped means to slapped. It slapped softly against. Okay, like the waves lapped against the boat. The docks were swarming with confirmed tramps, sailors on the beach, like himself, who had either jumped ship or fleeing some crime. They're loafers given to idleness. So, this word tramp might have a different meaning in common society, but within the text of this story, it means someone who loafs about on the beach, someone who doesn't have a job and waits for handouts for food. So loafers given to idleness, who kept alive one knows not how. He doesn't understand how they keep living. They live by begging and stealing, spending their days as if they were the beads of some grimy rosary, waiting for who knows what extraordinary events, or not expecting anything, people of the strangest and most exotic races and places, and even some in whose existence one doesn't believe until one sees a living example. Okay, that means that you wouldn't even believe that these people existed until you saw them. The following day, convinced that he could not hold out much longer, the youth decided to resort to any means to get some food. Walking along, he found himself in front of a ship that had docked the night before, and was loading wheat. A line of men, heavy sacks on their shoulders, shuttled from the freight cars across the gangplank to the hatchways of the ship's hold, where the stevedores received the cargo. Remember, these are people who load and unload ships. He watched for a while until he dared speak to the foreman, offering his services. He was accepted, and enthusiastically he took his place in the long line of dock workers. During the first period of the day he worked well, but later he began to feel tired and dizzy. He swayed as he crossed the gangplank, the heavy load on his shoulder. On seeing at his feet the opening between the side of the ship and the thick wall of the wharf at the bottom of which the sea, stained with oil and littered with garbage, lapped quietly. So he's looking at the plank, the thin plank he's walking on, but he's also seeing on either side is the ocean below him, and that's making him dizzy. Plus he hasn't eaten. There was a brief pause at lunchtime, and while some of the men went off to nearby eating places, the others ate what they had brought. The boy stretched out on the ground to rest, hiding his hunger. Let's see if we have any new words today on this page. Anguished, great pain, or tormented. Entrails is another word for intestines. Often you'll hear that around Halloween time. He finished his day's work completely exhausted, covered with sweat, at the end of his rope. While the laborers were leaving, the boy sat on some sacks, watching for the foreman, and when the last man had gone, approached him, confused and stuttering. He asked, without explaining what was happening to him, if he could be paid immediately, or if it were possible to get an advance on his earnings. So he's asking for some money. The foreman answered that it was customary to pay at the end of the job, and that it would still be necessary to work the following day in order to finish loading the ship. One more day! On the other hand, they had never paid a cent in advance. But, he said, if you need it, I could lend you about 40 cents. That's all I have. The boy thanked him for his offer with an anguished smile, a tormented smile, and left. Then the boy was seized by acute despair. Means he's very much in despair. He was hungry, hungry, hungry. Hunger doubled him over like a heavy, broad whiplash. He saw everything through a blue haze, and he staggered like a drunk when he walked. Nevertheless, he would not have been able to complain or to shout, for his suffering was deep and exhausting. It was not pain, but anguish, the end. It seemed to him that he was flattened out by a great weight. Suddenly, his entrails, his intestines, are on fire, and he stood still. He began to bend down, down, doubling over forcefully like a rod of steel, until he thought that he would drop. At that instant, as if a window opened before him, he saw his home. The view from it, the faces of his mother, brothers, and sisters, all that he wanted and loved, appeared and disappeared before his eyes shut by fatigue. Then little by little the giddiness passed, and he began to straighten up, while the burning subsided gradually. Finally he straightened up, breathing deeply. One more hour, and he would drop unconscious to the ground. So let's check out our new word. Subsided gradually. If we're going to use our context clues, we can tell that he is in a great deal of pain, and we can see that something is gradually happening, and finally he's able to stand up. So if we had to guess at the meaning, we might say that it's lessened or getting better. Okay. He quickened his step as if he were fleeing another dizzy spell, and as he walked he made up his mind to eat anywhere, without paying, even if they shamed him, beat him, sent him to jail, anything. The main thing was to eat, eat, eat. 100 times he mentally repeated the word eat, 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 until it lost its meaning, leaving his head feeling hot and empty. He did not intend to run away. He would simply say to the owner, "Sir, I was hungry, 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 and I can't pay. Do what you want." He came to the outskirts of the city, and on one of the first streets he found a milk bar. It was a small, clean, and airy place with little tables with marble tops. Behind the counter stood a blonde lady in a very white apron. He chose that place. There were few passer-by. He could have eaten at one of the cheap grills near the wharves, but they were always full of people who gambled and drank. There was only one customer in the milk bar. He was a little old man with glasses who sat reading, his nose stuck between the pages of a newspaper, motionless as if glued to his chair. On the little tables there was a half-empty glass of milk. Oh, sorry. While he waited for him to leave, the boy walked up and down the sidewalk. He felt the burning sensation in his stomach. The burning sensation in his stomach returning little by little, and he waited 5, 10, up to 15 minutes. So he's waiting for this man to leave. Let's see if we have any new words on this page. Looks like just one. Castilian. Related to Castle. Castile? A region of central and northern Spain. That is new to me. Back here. He grew tired and excuse me, and stood to one side of the door, from where he cast glances like stones at the old man. It's almost like he's glaring at the old man. What the devil could he be reading with such attention? The boy even imagined the old man was his enemy, who knew his intentions and decided to frustrate them. He felt like entering and saying something insulting that would force the old man to leave, a rude word or phrase that would show him he had no right to sit there reading for an hour for so small a purchase. Finally, the client finished what he was reading, or at least interrupted it. He downed the rest of his milk in one gulp, got up slowly, paid, and walked toward the door. He went out. He was a stoop-shouldered old man, probably a carpenter or a varnisher. Once in the street, the old man put on his glasses, stuck his nose in the newspaper again, and walked slowly away, stopping every 10 steps to read more closely. The youth waited until he was some distance away and then entered. For a moment, the boy stood by the entrance, undecided, not knowing where to sit. Finally, he chose a table and walked toward it, but halfway there he changed his mind, walked back, tripped over a chair, and finally put himself in a corner. Couldn't decide where to sit. The lady came, wiped the tabletop with the rag, and in a soft voice that had a trace of a Castilian accent asked him, "What will you have?" "A glass of milk." "Large?" "Yes, large." "Is that all?" Let's see if we have any new words on this page to check out. No. "Are there any biscuits?" "No, vanilla wafers." "Well, vanilla wafers." When the lady had turned away, he wiped his hands on his knees, rejoicing, as if he were cold and about to drink something hot. The lady returned and placed before him a large glass of milk and a dish full of vanilla wafers. Then she went back to her place behind the counter. His first impulse was to drink the milk in one gulp, then eat the vanilla wafers, but he immediately changed his mind. He felt the woman's eyes were watching him with curiosity and attention. He did not dare look at her. He felt that if he did, she would guess his situation and his shameful intentions, and he would have to get up and leave without touching what he ordered. Slowly, he took a vanilla wafer, and moistening it in the milk, he took a bite. He took a sip of the milk, and he felt the burning in his stomach diminishing, dying away. But he became aware of the reality of his desperate situation at once, and he felt something tight and hot well up inside, choking him. He realized he was about to cry, to sob out loud or aloud, and although he knew that the lady was looking at him, he could neither hold back nor undo the burning knot of tears that grew tighter and tighter. He fought it, and as he fought, he ate hurriedly, as if frightened, afraid that crying would keep him from eating. When he finished the milk and the wafers, His eyes clouded, and something hot rolled down his nose and on into the glass. A terrible sob racked his whole body. He held his head in his hands, and for a long time he cried with rage, cried with shame, crying as he had never cried before. See if we have any new words on this page. No. He was hunched over crying when he felt a hand caress his tired head, and heard a woman's voice with a sweet Castilian accent say to him, "Cry, son, cry." Again his eyes filled with tears, and he cried as intensely as before, but this time not with pain but with joy. He felt a great refreshing sensation spread inside him, extinguishing the hot something that had nearly strangled him. So this joy was putting out that kind of hot burning pain he had. As he cried, it seemed to him that his life and feelings were cleansed like a glass under a stream of water, recovering the clearness and firmness of former days. When the crying spell passed, he wiped his eyes and face with his handkerchief, feeling relieved. A handkerchief is like a napkin. He raised his head and looked at the lady, but she was no longer looking at him. She was gazing out at the street, at a distant point in space, and her face seemed sad. On the table before him there was another glass of milk, and another dish heaped with vanilla wafers. He ate slowly, without thinking about anything, as if nothing had happened to him, as if he were at home, and his mother were that woman who was standing behind the counter. When he finished, it had grown dark, and the place was lit by an electric light. He remained seated for a while, wondering what he would say to the lady when he left, without thinking of anything appropriate. At last he got up and said simply, "Thank you very much, ma'am. Goodbye." "Goodbye, son," she answered. He went out. The wind blowing from the sea refreshed his face, still hot from weeping. He walked about aimlessly for a while, then went down a street that led to the docks. It was a very beautiful night, and the large stars gleamed in the summer sky. No new words. He thought about the blonde lady who had treated him so generously, resolving to repay her, or promising to repay her, to reward her as she deserved when he got some money. But these thoughts of gratitude or thanks vanished with the burning of his face until not one remained, and the recent event receded and was lost in the recesses of his past life. So he started thinking about how he wanted to repay her, but then these thoughts seemed to go away. Suddenly, he surprised himself humming. He straightened up happily, strode on with assurance and determination. He came to the edge of the sea and walked back and forth with a spring in his step. He felt like a new man, as if his inner forces, previously scattered, had reassembled and united solidly. So he had felt scattered before, and now he felt like he was all put back together. Then he sat down on a pile of burlap sacks. Fatigue, like a tingling sensation, climbed up his leg, and fatigue is being tired. He looked at the sea. The lights of the wharf and ships spread over the water in a reddish gold ripple, trembling softly. He stretched out on his back, looking up at the sky for a long time. He did not feel like thinking, or singing, or talking. He just felt alive. That was all. Then he fell asleep with his face toward the sea. The end. This is our next story.